All right. Well, welcome, Carmen and Alana. I'm so glad to have you both here. I know we've been talking for a little while about having this conversation. It took a little bit to get it together, but I'm really glad that we did. Um, yeah, and I just want to say that I love both of your work so much. Carmen, your translation of the cloud has become, I think, the standard for contemplatives to use. Pretty much everyone I do spiritual direction with who has read the cloud said they didn't understand it until they read your translation, and now it's one of the most important books in their lives. And so I think that's a huge gift that you give into the world, and I'm so appreciative of that.
Thanks.
Yeah, well, and Alana, I'm a little newer to your work. I hadn't encountered you until Carmen introduced us. But I listened to your album Sanctuary with Jim Finley recently on the recommendation of some of the people in our community. I said, how should I engage with Alana's work and where should I start? And they all said go straight to Sanctuary and Christ Team, which was also really good. And I have to say that what the work you did with Jim Finley in Sanctuary is just like this amazing. I'm so glad you put that into the world. Like it's just so good. And it touched me personally. I've been struggling a little bit with some stuff that's related to it lately, and I took the advice of some people in our community, and I made it a meditative practice. I turned off the lights and I laid down and I listened to the whole album, and I was blessed with the gift of tears, which I think is such an important thing. The old monks will often talk about tears as this sort of baptism of the soul, this washing clean of our spirit. And I received that gift as I listened to your album. So thank you so much for putting that beautiful medicine.
Thank you.
Yeah, so maybe I'll pass it to both of you if you have anything you want to open and say. Carmen, do you want to start first?
Oh, I just appreciate your bringing us together, Justin, because I've been a fan of your work and you've been so kind to let me be a part of your community online. And then I have to say, Alana, your work has touched me deeply, and Point Vierge just broke my heart open. It's just gorgeous, and it takes you into the liminal spaces. And I love, Justin, how you said it's very, it's good medicine, because it's, to me, Alana, your work gets into the lacrimae rerum of things, and it really does bring us. I think, in fact, can I read something? Do y'all mind if I open up with something from Instagram? You wrote, Alana, recently at the Mediatrix and also on your own page. Music can traverse into the territory of bone memory and touch the ache, because this isn't just a mindset thing. It is in our body heritage and how we got here. It is in what we've long forgotten and what we've too long remembered. Exile energy, which made me think of Dick Schwartz's internal family systems. Exile energy got us into this. It will not get us out. And our job is to alchemize the strife and thread the eye of the needle. This is the one. This longing is our home. Aligning with that longing is everything. So between the two of you, I'm just going to say it, between the Psalter of the birds and your creativity that, Alana, I just have been so blessed by both of you. Y'all are truly inspirations to me.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Carmen. That's beautiful. I'm a little teary already. Good, for goodness sake. Yeah, speaking of tears, Justin. So yeah, thank you so much for initiating this, Justin. And I echo your comments about Carmen's Cloud. When I got a hold of that book quite a while ago now, I had read The Cloud, a number of translations through the years, and that one just blew me wide open on so many levels. It's like a foundational book in my library. And I love what Cynthia said, Carmen, about your translation of Practice of the Presence. She said you get the fragrance. I think she said the fragrance, and that is what we need to look for in good translators. And you really do. That's like your big gift to the world. And yeah, again, Justin here. I was actually on a call with someone else yesterday, and she hadn't heard of the Carmina Gadelica before. And so I recommended both of these because she's trying to sort of expand and become more aware of the textures of history and these practices that we've had, that we've know in our bones, that we carry, that are never lost, but they're lost cerebrally in the sort of modern world. So I really appreciate your collection. Just the thought that you put into it is, you can really feel it, your heart. And so.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm glad it touches me to hear that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I guess we had two sort of thoughts to talk about, and we don't have a very formal plan, so we'll just sort of wing it, I guess. But one was just to talk about, you know, what we're working on right now and what projects we have on the go, and I'm sure everybody who will listen to this talk will want to hear those. And the other was to talk about the healing power of music, which I think we've touched on already. And I think maybe, you know, Carmen, before we started recording, you were talking about the way that that the spoken word and teachings can have a music to them. And I think maybe that's the thing Alana was just pointing out about your translation, that there's a musicality to the way that you present it. And so many translations want to be sort of cold and technically accurate, which has its time and place. I mean, I'm very grateful for cold and accurate. Not because I'm accurate, but like that kind of the spirit of it is there in that way, and that's good sometimes. But I think that bringing out the musicality of these synths so important, and the song in their heart, and that's really where the medicine of it comes from. Because the author of The Cloud, being, you know, a brilliant philosopher and well read and all that, really is, or her, we don't know. True gift is, I think, in the poetry of you know, they take the writings of Dionysius and all these other great theological masters who Dionysius has a poetry to his writing too, but he's hard to read. You know, it's hard to get into. Bob brings in such a beautiful sort of poetry.
I love that. No, I absolutely love that, because when I really think music and writing, I think we sometimes forget that that's an integral part of good writing. And I've never translated somebody who didn't write well. And then I also have in the back of my mind my old professor at University of Georgia. I translate everything so that if he read it alongside the original, he would say, "Good job." So there is that accuracy. But if it's not beautiful as the original and doesn't have the tone of the original, and I know I'm with two creative people here who know what I'm talking about, then what is the point, really? Because it has to be embodied. Mm-hmm. And it has to be beautiful to be embodied, and not just in that left brain, literal, analytical. That really doesn't transform me. And I can honestly tell you, when I read The Cloud of Unknowing, I was translating it I was given 9 months, honest to goodness. And it was like triplets, you know? I mean, it was a lot of birthing and 9 months. And so I was working full time, but I was also spending 9 or so hours a day, not sleeping a whole lot. And I was a mother and taking care of people. I was doing a lot. But what I'm trying to say is I did a lot of downloading and shadow work during that time, because it was intensive meditation. I didn't have the words for it then, but and so when you read The Cloud of Unknowing in the Middle English, it is gorgeous, really. You get into the waves of it, and it's just like you described Alana's music, how it's medicine, listening to it in the dark as meditation. When you read, it's exactly the same as listening to Alana's music. When you read it in the Middle English, you cannot not meditate, because that's how he wrote it. He did that on purpose. He even says, if you'll treat my work as Lectio Divina, you'll get the essence of it. So when I hear people say they can't get The Cloud of Unknowing because it's so intense intellectually, I always think that tells me more about the person than it does about the cloud, if that makes any sense. Because how, you see in it what you most need from it, which is the opposite sometimes. Yeah. So thank you for saying that, because I really think music is everything. It really puts it in a new perspective to talking about it with Alana in the room and with you in the room, Justin, because I know you're all about chanting. It puts it in a new perspective, because to me, it's all about the chanting, it's all about the music.
Yeah. Yeah, it's disarming in a gentle way. So because it's resonance, that's, I've been learning more about the different resonances that affect the different chakras, and how it's not all your body's actually listening to the music. It's not just your ears. So there's aspects of your body that are hearing the timbre, say for instance of James Finley's voice in the project you're talking about, Justin, and knowing not even knowing his journey, but really the resonance of his journey in the timbre of his voice that has come through this whole transformative healing, wounded healer process. That's so well, like he's gone and come back, so to speak. I don't say it lightly to call him a bodhisattva, in the sense that he's here and it's all good, but at the same time with such care. And so that comes through in the resonance. So when we are working, when you're working with engineers, for instance, to capture the sound. And then the woman I worked with on Sanctuary, for the cellist that I worked with, she is such an intuitive musical bear to work with. So yeah, and then I had the double bassist as well, like, and the engineer that I was working with was also dying of cancer at the time of recording Sanctuary, and I was pregnant with my second when I composed and recorded, produced, and sang all of those songs. I always hear a little bit of tightness, quite a lot actually, in my voice, because I had no room. So I was 3 months in my third trimester when I recorded the vocals. But at the same time, then I'm working with a children's choir. It was just, it was a really beautiful time. And I'm exploring a lot right now what it looks like to offer what I do from my own experience as someone who's given birth, and someone who's made projects while making a human and like producing projects well, and how just how extraordinary that is. Like, not that I'm but just what an extraordinary thing it is to offer something like that into the world as that's happening in my own personal life. Including I got the mix for Sanctuary the day before I went into labor, and I got to listen to the very first mix when I was in the pool as I was laboring Francis into the world. So just things like that feed the mystery of it in a timeless realm. So
Oh, that's so great. I mean, I love that you were pregnant while you did that. That's such a symbolically, I think that's so powerful. I mean, that whole album sees like it's inviting people to usher in a birth in a way, of a new life.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote in one of my recent articles about how birth is, and I speak about it from the outside first. But my wife recently gave birth. We have a 6-month-old son at home now.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
And the whole process is just so profoundly mystical. In this embodied way, obviously. It's all about bodies. and there's pain there, and there's difficulty and there's struggle and there's sacrifice, but there's also all of that is for a purpose and for a reason and for something beautiful. And I think that there's something that matches that Sanctuary album and that. So I don't know. I don't know the full connection there, but I feel like that came through in some way, if that makes any sense.
I love it because what y'all sound like what y'all are saying to me is that there's no binary. It's all one. I mean, Mavis Staples sings about this in One Love. It's just it's all birthing a real baby. And if that's, you see, we can't even talk about this. It is all the one love. So I love hearing y'all talk about this process. I can imagine you in the pool, and I can imagine you, Justin, having this experience too, because it really does speak to the mystery, I think. Because, and what I love too is what you said about the timbre of Jim Finley's voice, how it reflects his Joseph Campbell, like, heroic journey of going and coming back and sharing with us all and being a healer of trauma. And I just think that's beautiful because you can also hear it in writing. I really do think that when you get someone who's really able to use whatever the language is, you can hear it so that their style of writing becomes one with their message. It's even true for somebody who sounds as weirdly distant as Alfred of Inisham, who was a 10th century Benedictine monk. And he wrote in Old English about God's love and mercy. And his poetic prose is as beautiful as his message. So I love how y'all are talking about these things that bring us into our bodies. Because good writing, you see, brings us into our bodies because we enter into this rhythm. And like how you said, Alana, you said that when we sing, it doesn't just affect our, like, we're not just thinking about the lyrics. We have this vibration going through us. It's one reason that through my decades, I'm not depressed now, but through my decades of chronic depression, which is hell. You keep, what did Churchill or somebody said, when you're in hell, what do? You keep going. When you're in hell, keep going. Well, and just realizing that I could always chant. I could chant at any time, and it did something. It didn't seem to fix it at the time, but it did change me. And just knowing that you need this, like I chant all the time. I used to think singing was for special occasions and special people like Alana or you chanting, Justin. Then I realized over the years, my name is Carmen. It means hello, song or poem. So since a child, I thought,
I guess I haven't made
we should sing. Yeah, we should sing every day. We shouldn't save it for funerals and weddings and graduations. And we should be like birds. We are birds. And people say, I can't sing. I'm like, yes, everyone can sing. Right? Wouldn't y'all agree?
My oldest son, who's turning 10, he hums a lot, like he's humming. And he has said, he's like, whenever I start to feel stressed out, it just calms me down.
Yeah.
And so the resonance of what he's actually doing, even there's research in the nasal cavities and the vibration that's happening in your, like, there's more going on there than meets the eye. And I've gotten into a practice in our sauna. That's where most of my chanting happens. And I'm doing some serious, like, major pivotal work this year around, if you make it like the folk opera is about dealing with complex storylines, but rather than trying to, compartmentalize it all into these hard, stony places, you can tell truth and you can actually transform it through the process of art and resonance into something completely different, because you're just taking that. It's like my kids are into Star Wars. It's like, it's the Force. It's like you can take all of that and pour it into this alchemy of a new creation, right? And so the way I've been able to do that is I spend time every morning after a walk in the sauna, and I get guttural in my, not just chanting words. I let myself have no words. I groan. I do what it takes because I'm about to put something into the world. I've only done 2 performances of it so far live, but last weekend it was 130 women, and they were alchemized in very surprising ways. It gets this really mysterious standing ovation that isn't about like a performance. It's like something dormant that we need to awaken inside of us starts to awaken, and they're like more alive suddenly. And I can't do that without like this sauna work that I'm doing. I just like to get out of the way for that to come through. And also another thing is that that I've learned, when, in particular, when you're working with chant or when you're delivering something resonant like that, is a lot of you're like bringing a lot of the energy in the room into yourself. And so I'm sure that happens when you're with speaking. I get more of this experience because I do the music part, but it comes in and it comes out in the song. It comes out as something else in the song. And so I do this thing in the sauna where I walk around the stage. I walk around where, like in my head or my imaginal, where I bless that area and say anything that doesn't want to alchemize but wants to hang out in me, like that's like not ready to do that, it just doesn't come as far as me. Because when you're singing like in that way, you're so open, and your sacral space is so open, you can open yourself up to some very unreconciled, unwilling to so that's kind of what I've done, is like, okay, anything is welcome that's ready to alchemize. And because otherwise it's amazing when you think about like the history of rock and roll and the amount of like power that comes from like say the Grateful Dead, or like an extraordinary band that brought this spirituality to large numbers of people. And then that energy coming from the crowd is coming into those people on stage. And it's no wonder they ended up needing drugs or needing something afterwards. If you aren't prepared to have, like, if you aren't prepared in your own self and in your own contemplative practices beforehand. Anyway, it's such a mystery, and it's really beautiful. But the wisdom starts to show up after a while.
Oh my gosh, okay, so I'm just levitating over here. Can I say that, Justin?
Yeah.
Because when you're talking about that guttural, like groaning in the sauna, like making space and also kind of preparing and embracing and just doing things perhaps you can't even put into words, right? But sort of preparation. You know, what's so fascinating, it also happens in translation. And when you said about no wonder they would need drugs because they're also taking in the energy of the audience, the way David Bowie talked about participation between the audience and the singer. And I was thinking, when I was translating The Cloud of Unknowing, I was wide open. And I'm not sure I was prepared, except for all the walks and things like that, but mentally not. And so sometimes you also have to not be I just have to say, I love what you're saying because it sounds so much wiser than what I did when I did The Cloud of Unknowing, in a way. And afterwards, I had done such intense shadow work with trauma in my childhood and such. And as Thomas Keating says, you know, junk comes up, like what you're talking about, the unready and sometimes the stuff that just needs to come up. I went to counseling. I was really fortunate to kind of skid into counseling. When I say I went to counseling, it makes it sound like I was like, okay, tomorrow. But I mean, I skid into it, and was very fortunate to find someone to help me process and integrate. So when you say, I'll never forget you saying you're in the sauna groaning, because I also do that in the marsh, when nobody's around.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we have these, in fact, that's what I was going to ask you both, but you've already answered it, Alana. I was going to ask you and Justin, what do y'all do as practice that people may not know about? For me, I talk to the marsh. With the marsh talks to me. But I'm wondering, you sort of answered some of it, Alana. And Justin, okay, is that okay to, I don't know if we planned this or not, but I'm curious because my thing is always, we're really fortunate to have heads and opposable thumbs, but what do you do that transforms you is always my question, if that makes sense. Yeah. Or sustains you or whatever.
I mean, I think that's the best question in many ways. I love, anyone who's read my stuff or whatever knows that I love the heady philosophy stuff. I'm all about that. But I think ultimately for me, philosophy or theology or whatever word you want to use always needs to be in service of contemplation. It's a beautiful and powerful thing, and I love it, and it helps me in that contemplation. It's not an obstacle at all, but it's a path to contemplation. It's a path to that, and so I'm so very glad that both of you brought it back to what we do and how we practice. And I think for me, Alana, when we were talking about your experience as a musician on stage, I went back to my experience as a small country preacher, which is very different. There weren't hundreds of people, there were tens of people. And I was in the United Church, which is a mainline Protestant church that has some really great social values, but not much in the way of ecstatic worship or anything like that. Often very sort of reserved in its Sunday morning expressions. And myself coming from a lot of experience in Indigenous ceremony and stuff like that, I didn't, that was one of the ways that I was very different. But when I was preaching, sometimes I could feel that very thing that you described. And actually there were a number of times, if I'm honest, and I feel like I shouldn't say that out loud because I want to be humble, but there were a number of times when there was a standing ovation and everyone just like stood up and applauded at the end of my sermon, which is not a normal thing that happens in the United Church. Like ever at all. And there was this real reciprocal sort of opening, if I can use the language of John Vervaeke, who I'll just drop his name because I love him, and you can check him whether you're into sort of the philosophical side of things. But this reciprocal opening, this way that what I put forward and what the congregation put forward equaled something greater than either or any of us could have done on our own. And I write my sermon and I think, okay, well, this is a great sermon. I'm happy with it or whatever. But then I preach it and it changes. And it is the same sermon, the words, because I'm a manuscript preacher. It's verbatim exactly what I wrote, but it's changed somehow in the spiritual level. The words have taken on a deeper meaning and connected with me. So yeah, I very much experience that. I haven't done that in many years because I don't preach too much. I'm doing some pulpit supply for a local congregation this winter. So maybe I'll be able to bring that back to my own life a little bit. But lately,
I'm curious, Justin, can you talk about the chanting in the woods?
Yeah.
I'm very curious to hear about this.
Yeah, for sure. So I love to be out in the bush. I mean, that's where I find my most connection and my most grounding. And just like you, Carmen, I speak the forest, the trees. And so I have a practice. When I go out on my own, at least, I'll go out with my dog and we're out in the middle of nowhere, so I can just have her off leash and she runs through the bush and whatever. And I walk through the bush and I thank everything. And so I with each step I say thank you, Mother Earth, and I look up and I say thank you, sky, and I name the different kinds of trees. I say thank you, birch, and I thank you, juniper, and thank you, pine, and thank you, maple, and thank you, oak. And I look over the cliff because I live on an island and there's this bluff right over the bay where I walk, and I look out at the water and I thank the grandmother lake and I say thank you, lake. And so that's sort of my introductory practice. And I walk along the path until I get to this bench where I often sit. well, I throw the stick for the dog first so that she's entertained and happy and lets me do my thing. And then I sit and I'll chant. I often chant. Lately, I've been doing a practice that kind of comes from Peter Levine, who, like Richard Schwartz, is sort of one of these pioneering people in the therapy world, and very much about somatic practice. And he has this thing he just calls the VOO exercise, where he just goes VOO as a kind of chanting. And the science behind it is that it activates the vagal nervous system with this sort of deep resonance in the core of the abdomen. And I think that is really practical and really helpful for me. I find a lot of with both Peter Levine and Richard Schwartz, I find their insights really great. But a lot of the sort of modern therapy practice sort of lack the poetry in a lot of ways. So VOO to me doesn't have much. So I do peace instead. I just go peace like that for long periods of time. And I spiritually, like in my mind's eye, in my heart, I imagine that peace sort of descending down into my body. So that it's the peace of Christ that I'm not pushing in, but just allowing to descend in. And so that's my most common chanting practice right now. I do also, of course, chant the Psalms and from the Bible and also from Psalter of the Birds. And I find that's really nice. The peace one is really just an embodied one. It's really just about my body, and that's where I'm at right now. That's what I've been doing. But the Psalter really brings together the mind and the heart, I think, in a really great way. And I could talk more about some of the theology around that from Athanasius that I love. But I don't want to take up too much time. I don't know if anyone else has anything.
This makes me so happy to hear. It just really does. Because when we had the atmospheric rivers come by several months ago, we had like, I don't know, 30, a lot of them. And there was a lot of concern around the flooding, and humans have a hard time with these things. And I would go out into the marsh with my boots on, and you could always tell the newcomers because they would always come to a certain point in the marsh and have to turn back. And I always, knew to come prepared. And I'd be walking through the waters where it was safe to, and thanking the egrets for letting me come, because they were joyful. They were so joyful. The water, there was so much water, and you could feel the joy in there, every wing movement, every landing, every food they snatched up in their ballets. And I love hearing you mention thank you, because I do this an hour or two every day going through the marsh, and it's not something I do because I have it on my list. I do it the way I also eat, and, I think sometimes we look for things we can chant, what things are allowed to chant. I'm speaking for myself when I say we there, I suppose, because when I was growing up, there were only certain things that were orthodox. There were very few things that were orthodox. And as I've grown up, I chant or do. And one of the things I do think kept me from having an ending of life difficulty after translating the cloud is that I've always done Lectio Divina. I've always taken scripture into me and having that chanting quality. It just became chants. My having a verse on a 3x5 card, eventually it becomes music. I'm not Alana, but I'm not you, Justin, but eventually things just become music. And I'm really grateful for having this backlist of all these come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, just floating around all the time to me. But one of the things that I moved into was just by instinct, George Herbert poems, Mary Oliver poems, other, even words by, say, Malidoma, Patrice Sommet. I mean, you just find different things. And then into Buddhist chants, like Teata Om Bekanze Maha Bekanze Ratsa Samudate Soha. And sometimes the differentness of it for my psyche and my past experience opens me up in new ways. And also sometimes it can go around the trauma. Like sometimes I need different, and I wish someone had told me when I was younger that because when I went to Germany as a student on a scholarship, I had pretty much given up on Christianity, not in the worst way possible, not in a mental way, in a whole-bodied way. Like literally could not take it in anymore because of the abuse it was associated with in my experience. And then I met Mother Bushbeck, and she wanted me to read the Bible to her in German. And I could take in the truths through her lived experience of surviving World War II with a husband who was a preacher who was 5 years, a Lutheran minister, 5 years in a Russian prison, and she was a refugee. I could take in, like the way you say, Jim's healing, the wounded healer. Mother Bushbeck was a wounded healer, and she somehow wanted me to read the Bible to her in German, and it caught in me again. Not in my head, it caught in my whole body. And I just think this is what, when you say you chant the peace or the boo or whatever it does, I just wish somebody had told me when I was younger, like the way, Alana, you're very good at blazing your own trail. You're talking about making even the difficult ancestors, like having an integration in a healthy way of the difficult ancestors, and you make this new trail, kind of like Christine Walters Paintner. She has this book on ancestors and angels and saints. And I just think we need to be turned loose of the standardized test. You know what I'm talking about? Whether it's religion or just our own intellectual mindsets, we need to be turned loose to find the healing where our instinct and our loving hearts direct us. Does that make any sense?
Oh yeah, for sure. Like, I'm an amateur, like, researcher, historian. I'm a songwriter first and foremost, but it's so much a part of what I do. And part of the reason why is because of the need for bodily healing surrounding orthodoxy, or the narrowing, and knowing kind of where that comes from and why in many ways, and researching so much that isn't acceptable, and but at the same time, just remembering, like I said, exile energy got us into this. It won't get us out. And so that's why I said alchemy, because if we're going to, like, what if we have a difficult ancestor, right? There's a kind of a trend right now to just sort of bypass the unsexy ancestors and get to what we think of as like this sort of like, romantic expression in the world that predates the patriarchy, which I, on the one hand, completely get. And then when we look at the full picture of that, like, what was happening when those first axial world religions, the lights go on, right? Like 1500 BCE or whatever. Well, some extraordinary things were happening. And then leading up to that with the hymn writers and the rishis and different people that are intuiting like a deeper, more egalitarian longing that's trying to make manifest here, right? And so these are where, that's kind of the edge of how these developed. But what they forgot, from that magic era, that pre-axial era, that's still with us, thankfully, right? Is that how do we look after the village, right? So the village wisdom is there in that pre-axial age. And what got carried forward more so into those first axial world religions, all of them as they developed, was a really disintegrated and expression of tribalism. So, because we know how to look after the village here, but this is, it's like, can only be this many people, right? And then what happens when that wisdom is essentially forgotten or put aside, and then this sort of the borders are more about like who I belong to and who you belong to, and ne'er the twain shall meet except in a clash, right? And so what does it look like to go, okay, yes, there's complexity here, but how do we look at the whole thing and bring and glean all the beauty and the treasures that are all throughout there, put them in our cloaks and head on in, because we're going in, right? So, and when we go in, if our hearts are not flesh, watch out. So
Yeah,
that's
so
kind of where I'm at with my creative world right now. Is this, where do I find this, and how do I swish it up in the cauldron?
Oh, I love that.
yeah, I love that too, and it's very, very resonant with the work that I'm doing right now. You know, in the spirit of sort of alchemy and of welcoming our ancestors, both insightful and with shortcomings. The next book I'm working on, which is almost done. I keep thinking that it's done and then it's not. So I thought I'd have it done by the end of this year, but it'll definitely be 2024 at some point. But anyway, it's got a lot in it, and it's come a long ways. And my whole intention with it is to do the thing that you just described, Alana, is to go through the tradition, the Christian tradition in general, the Celtic Christian tradition in particular, and also the desert tradition, and look at things that sometimes our modern biases can't see the beauty in. So, like penance, for instance, you know, penance can be done really badly, of course, and so I'm not in any way suggesting that's not true. It can become about hating yourself and beating yourself up, and that's what it's come to mean in our modern context. But in the Celtic penitentials, which is really the original sort of where the penance as we think of it as a system comes from, it's from the Irish and Welsh traditions. Penance was called medicine, and most of the penitentials open with a prologue that says something to the effect of, "Here begins a collection of medicines for the healing of souls." And Columbanus, one of the monks, he said something that really spoke to what you were saying, or I feel like connected to what you were saying, Carmen, about having sort of different seasons and different times of things, and not just this sort of orthodox, to use that word, sort of regimented, you know, you go to church and here's the catechism and here's the thing, everybody goes through the same thing. And so when Columbanus is describing the way a spiritual director should be, an anamkara, and in the Irish tradition, an anamkara means soul friend, and that was the word for spiritual director. It had also a sense of sort of elder and mentor, and that kind of thing. And so when he's describing the way an anamkara should be with the people that they meet with, he says, in the same way that doctors of the body do not prescribe the same medicine to every person who comes to them, so a doctor of the soul cannot prescribe the same medicine to every person who comes to them. And they must be willing and ready to compound their medicines in different various ways according to the needs of the individual. And so my work is in my next book, at least, is about compiling all these different spiritual medicines that I've been able to glean from the Celtic tradition, from the desert tradition, and also from my experience, you know, in ceremony and stuff like that. I try to avoid cultural appropriation, so the spirit of those things I learned is in there, even though I express it all within a Celtic Christian framework. But the idea is that we transform the wounds. The old saying in the ancient world is, contraries are cured by contraries. And so when the Celtic monks would, following the desert monks, would categorize all these different kinds of wounds that a soul could have, and then they would recommend medicines, penances, that are based on building up the opposite. So rather than smashing down the wound, you're actually building up the thing that heals it. And so if you struggle with pride or shame, for instance, I think the contrary of both is humility. Then it's about finding practices that develop humility, rather than sort of beating up your pride or beating up your shame. It's about developing and cultivating the opposite virtue. Yeah.
That reminds me of, do you know that story, Carmen and Justin, of Thomas Keating when he was a young monk, and they were approaching Lent? Do you know this story?
I think so.
They were approaching Lent, and he was just getting like right ready for his big fast, and And then the abbot told him that he would be the one that was eating during Lent. Anyway, it just reminds me of this sort of homeopathy of, yes, I get it.
I love it because what you're both saying is so like the cloud of unknowing, Anonymous, where he says, I'm trying to tell you what worked for me. He says, but God is the teacher. And that's what Brother Lawrence says too. You know, the homeopathy, what you're talking about also, Justin, with these as medicines and as they're needing to have nuanced use, like wise use. I love that too, because, you know, if you're somebody who studies history, penance, the first thing you think of is, wow, they were sold. And, you know, things eventually became a marketed thing. And I love the fact that you're bringing us back into this embodied wisdom of penance as medicine, as something that's healing and needed. And I mean, sometimes it can be very, what's the word? You know, like how we get little sweet things sometimes to put into the medicine for our kids. I mean, sometimes you kind of feel like you get this little, I mean, we don't think of God that way, or love that way. I mean, this little theological thing we've constructed, but I sometimes think, oh, thank you for putting that little flavoring in there to help it go down. Thank you so much. You know, yeah, very grateful, very grateful. Wow, y'all have I love that y'all are both trailblazers. I really do. These are the people I always am listening to, the ones who are like listening to their hearts first, you know, and have that sort of, you know, what is Richard Rohr says, you have tradition, scripture, and experience. I mean, but you have like a tricycle of stability and such, where it's not just going off a road by yourself. I really listen to people who are trying very hard to be real. And as you said, Alana, to have a heart, because only a heart can hold all of the, like, I know when I'm teaching, there's always, I think, okay, we could have this or this. And then I realize, because that's how our minds work. If I'm needing to handle a kind of a tricky situation, I always end up going, show me that third and fourth and fifth and sixth, because every student presents me with a third and fourth and fifth and sixth challenge sometimes. You know what I'm saying? It's like we can't just go, I know. It has to be a heart willing to be open to not know. And that to me is the only way. And it sure can be tricky sometimes, because humility has to be remade every day. You know, I mean, really, yeah. It's like I eat steel cut oats in the morning, and you know, it takes a while. And it has to be redone. You can't just package it and open it up every morning. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. There's Justin, what you were saying about sort of rehydrating a more holistic approach to some of these like almost taboo subjects now that would be seen as like this narrow, but actually, if you really go into the history of it and the nuances and the context and all of that, you get so much treasure that we need. So this cut and dried way of doing things is deeply not nuanced and super unhelpful because we're in a great turning right now. And so what we bring through, and so for me, it's been about rehydrating devotion, and even praise. Okay, so for me, that's a big deal, because I've experienced in my history, really like expressions that don't know that it's coming from this sort of Jesus as Caesar praise, right? Like this, like where that whole thing comes from when Jesus was sort of basically translated into a Caesar, you know, really it was Constantine the Great that we were supposed to praise, and Jesus got a little bit of a side hustle going on, but it kind of, that's where it all kind of comes from. So as the trajectory of that just expand, you end up in the 1970s and 80s and 90s of hang loose with Jesus age, right? Like you end up in this experience where your body at a certain point has a traumatic response to praise, because it's coming from like, and you've intuited that it's come from this sort of that place, right? And so what do you do with that? Do you say there's no room for devotion and praise now, right? So because if you that's what you can do, but you'll end up always, if that's what you have to do to begin with, to protect your body or to whatever. But eventually, as you're growing with it, if you don't deal with this, if you don't look at it and metabolize it and explore what is it inside of myself that desires to have devotion, to have a praise, like you're probably both familiar with the storyteller Martin Shaw. He quotes Gaston Bachelor, the philosopher, who says, "The world seeks to be admired by you," right? And I'm still in the middle of.
Oh.
Okay. Thanks, honey. Okay. They're just letting me know about lunch. Isn't that amazing that lunch is made and I'm sitting here? But so at the very last song on the folk opera is called Praise the Maker. And it's really like, I call it, like, kind of jokingly, my rewilded We Are the World,
Yeah.
right? Where it's like, it's very influenced by, Celtic spirituality and the Carmina Gadelica, and just this sense of the more than human participating, right, in praising each other. Like you're saying, you go out to the marsh, you go out to the woods. We have this windrow of trees, and one of the last standing ones along the whole stretch here. And I went out to let it know it didn't have to feel hostile. If it needed to feel that way, it can, but that it's safe, like the stewardship and the like the relationship, right? And there's a big rock inside of this windrow that our kids have called the rock of perception. So we go there and to get like perspective on things, right? But this song, Praise the Maker, just, it takes all the things, the way historically Alexander Carmichael is getting these women and men are following out of the town because they're not really supposed to have these incantations anymore, or not, and then they share with him how vast their perception is in terms of their devotion for life itself and for the maker that imbues that life. And so that's another thing for me, is just like, it's not just about going back, but it's like, what are we about to forget here? Right, as we're moving through. So
I love
and as a side note, that's actually a really helpful insight for me as a spiritual director. I don't have a background in a sort of rigid boxed Christianity. It's not a thing that I have personal experience with. I grew up Quaker, which is like super open, especially in Canada. The Canadian Quakers are like, I was Quaker / Wiccan, and a bunch of my friends were Quaker / Buddhist, and it's not at all a dogmatic tradition. And then I spent a bunch of time in ceremony, which is guided. And so sometimes as a spiritual director, I recommend practices that I think are really great from the Christian tradition, and they trigger people, and it catches me off guard because I'm not expecting them to have this sort of reaction to it. And so that thought about how praise, which I also see as this beautiful, important thing, I'm going to talk about that in a second, how that could become something for someone else because of this sort of history that I am not necessarily as privy to. So that's a really good thing for me to keep in mind. I appreciate that.
I love what y'all are saying. I mean, y'all are kind of saying, it's almost like it keeps reminding me of Tonglen, where we're taking in and putting out, taking in the weary, the tired, the suffering, putting out peace, but takes energy and intention. I love the fact that you're both kind of talking about in different ways the Edict of Milan and then Constantine, and how Christianity got yoked let itself be yoked or something with empire. And so how we're all trying to disentangle, alchemize, run from, sometimes reject, exile, and ultimately try to transform with this history that's very complex and filled with this suffering. And what I was trying to say a minute ago, but didn't quite say, was I love the fact, Justin, that you're reclaiming penance, because what I was thinking of as the money part is when it became the pardons, when you could just buy a pardon, and how it's so easy to, in the empire mindset, to turn spirituality or religion into a servant of, in the end, greed, because really it's all the same thing. And so I love that you're bringing it back to, because my theology, if I had one, because that sounds funny to say, doesn't it, to me? I'm an English teacher, really, but my theology would be the land, would start with the land. And that's why I think we all have talked about going back to the land, talking with and listening to the rock of perspective, right? Perception. What was it? Perception or perspective?
Rock of perception.
But yeah, the rock. See, I really relate to this, the rock of perception, because Jesus said if they didn't say, even the rocks would cry out, and I'm like, they are. I'm always like, the rocks are crying out to me. So yeah, I just think my theology is the land. This is the land is what I listen to first. I'll be the one to say it, because it has never lied to me. Do you know? And it has often said to me, what are you doing? Like, and I've often said to it, what do I need to do? Brother Lawrence says, you would be surprised the conversations people have in these moments of returning to love. Because I think, Justin, you identify gratitude. That's a huge thing I try to work on and remind myself. And then asking for help, the desert tradition, like you're talking about, always, help, and the Jesus prayer. But then there's that gray area that where we exile things, where I reclaim that by saying, what the heck is, like I have these conversations. We don't talk about that much, but where I have these little things, like it's like a therapy session where I'm saying that my heart, and my heart is not always, what you would put on in this right now. The heart has its moments of inchoate, not very public consumptive, able to be, put out in public moments. And those are the things that I think your chanting, your books, Justin, your music, what are those other things we're calling that you're doing, Alana? The genres that you're kind of doing, genre busting with Jim Finley and stuff. Yeah.
I don't even know what it is.
It's Mechthild of Magdeburgish. You know what I'm saying? It's very.
All I know is Spotify has no idea who the hell I am.
That's what I'm saying. The best stuff is beyond the genre, right? So yeah, I appreciate it so much because it feeds my soul. It really does.
Yeah, and I think going back to the land is such a key part. And I was thinking, Alana, when you were talking about how praise ties into that in the Psalms as well. In the Psalms, there's I'm not sure how many, but a bunch of times where the trees, the ocean, the waves, the mountains, all kinds of different pieces of nature are praising God and singing to God. And maybe I'll come back to Athanasius now, because one of the things that he talks about, and I talk about this in the introduction to Psalter of the Birds, is that when we chant the Psalms, what we're doing is we're aligning ourselves, and he's explicit. He means our whole selves. He makes a real point of saying our bodies, our minds, and our spirits, all of it, with the song of creation, with the song that the trees and the mountains and the oceans are singing of praise. And I think you're so right to bring up praise, because I think of Plato, and he said that wonder is the beginning of philosophy. That's where it all begins. And of course, philosophy for Plato didn't mean what we think of it today. It meant the love of wisdom and the love of what is true, good, and beautiful.
And curiosity.
Yeah, wonder and curiosity. Yeah, and all of that goes into praise, and so when we're singing and we're joining that song of creation, and aligning ourselves with it through our bodies and our minds and our spirits. I think that's the beginning of everything. If I can say that there was one beginning, that would be probably it.
When we were in Europe last year, we went back to Poland to my Kashubian great grandparents' land, and then up in the West Highlands of Scotland and the Hebrides, and then in the West Country of England. And when we were on the Isle of Lewis, I really wanted to attend a free church service where the Scottish Gaelic was spoken and where the Psalms were chanted. I don't know if you've ever heard. You can go onto YouTube, and there have been different documentaries on this style. But we got to go and be a part of the service and that chanting, and I was so moved sitting in this space that had no graven images on the walls, and no, very simple and a lot of history, right, from my own background, from my mom's side, of very legalistic ideas. It's a whole other story. I've done so much research on how that all bubbled up in the Highlands. But and again, it's like you can really see different types of puritanical expressions that come from an oppressed people to sort of double down on certain things that you want to keep your own at the very least, right? But this chanting in the Psalms in Gaelic was so stunning and so beautiful and so free. It sounds like, if I could make a video to give you what it sounds like a flock of starlings, because the chanter will sing and make up a melody on the spot, and then everyone tries to follow, and you would think that would be like a crash, but it's the most extraordinary sound. And I did so much healing just in that 1 hour of this very, I could tell that the minister might have been giving me a bit of fire and brimstone, but it didn't matter. It just doesn't matter anymore. It's like he is who it was just so, I was so free and so healed, ancestrally. And to think of these people where this language has developed, where left and right is actually north and south, because it's always with your back to the Atlantic, and how much the language is like shaped by the land, and they're chanting these creation psalms. And so that's really what I felt, more than anything, sitting in the really rigid pew and so anyway.
I don't think I've heard that. I want to hear it. I wrote it down, Psalms in Gaelic. I mean, if you have a particular one online you know of, can you give it to us?
Yeah, I'm not sure. If you just go, you'll find it. There's been some lovely little documentaries made about this style, which is actually going extinct.
Okay.
Right? As the story of modern life continues, there aren't people carrying. In fact, someone told me that there's one church there, it's a woman leading the Psalms because they can't find a man to do it, who can do it. So you can really see that this, because it's very traditional. At one point, the women sat on this side and the men sat over here, and I've been around that because I have beautiful friends who grew up very traditional Mennonite and that sort. And so it wasn't a shock to me, but I just had such great gratitude that they welcomed us, and that I could be there for that part of my own heritage to just heal it. Yeah.
Can I just say, just the fact that it sounded like a flock of starlings, and the improvisational, and yet also totally in unison. I mean, I'm going to go look this up. You know, I followed your pilgrimage, you and your family's pilgrimage through the wonders of social media, what Mirabai Starr calls the holy land of social media. And it really does make it, you think, okay, this is a good thing, like with your community, Justin. I'm like, okay, this is good. I love the fact that you both talking about praise and wonder. So how you're saying it all starts with wonder. I just love that because I think sometimes, have you ever had the experience where you're in the depths of suffering, like legitimate suffering, not like you didn't get something you wanted or something, but I mean legitimate affliction, Simone Bay calls it, and something happens and it just strikes you. And I think of Job when he was in the middle of legitimate suffering, and God says to him, "Did you count the clouds?" You know, brings us back to this, because I have spent so much time staring at the clouds. And when you're translating the cloud of unknowing, it's like when you're doing the birthing process of the music and you're pregnant. When you're translating the cloud of unknowing, you notice clouds in a way that you never unknow, which is very ironic, isn't it? Unknow. And I have to say that one line from Job, can you count the clouds? Has resonated through my soul for decades. When you have those moments when you're in the depths of suffering and you look up at this, it can be something, you're not at the Grand Canyon, you're not in any particular spot. You may just look out the window while you're washing dishes and you see a bird cross through the sky and you think, I wonder, is that a hawk or a buzzard and it's just something about it takes your heart with it. And you think, no, I cannot count the clouds. And it's that reminder of the wonder, the praise that's always there because we're not alone. So I just love the way y'all bring this alchemy, because I really am not interested in religion per se. I am interested in whatever aspects it is associated with religion that can transform me into a kinder, wiser, more helpful at reducing suffering person. You know, and y'all bring that y'all bubble that up. I really do appreciate it. Yeah.
Thank you, Carmen.
Yeah. And isn't did I see right, Alana? Is your folk opera, is it like happening tomorrow? Like, is it really, what is the deal? It's November 1st tomorrow.
I'm releasing the folk opera on February 1st.
Okay.
But I'm doing a crowdfunding for the launch portion of it, and people can go into a secret area and listen.
That's it.
Starting tomorrow. So that way they can get access to it. Because I want to position it in the best possible way. So I'm getting some help with that. Because I've seen now two times it's been performed live, what it has done. So I don't want to just go, oh, it's out, and then like do nothing I want to make sure that I've done my utmost and my due diligence around just sensing what ears and what bodies want to hear this work.
So people can go, I mean, because people are watching this. So it's like you go, because I didn't have time to look at it this morning, but they go to Mediatrix, or they can go to, and then find this secret. Because I saw the word secret and I was like, I wonder, because since we were about to meet, and I looked at it before and saw it, but do you mind explaining? So you just go into.
So if someone goes to my Instagram, so I have two Instagrams.
Yeah.
Alana Levandoski, which is where all of the Christian contemplative work is put out, and I'm working on something new over there, actually, with a drone from a hurdy-gurdy that will have chants connected to Aramaic and Greek words that were translated in a problematic way, like repent versus move into the larger mind, so metanoia, things like this. So I'm doing that over there, but I started basically a band name called Mediatrix, because this folk opera that I've made is different than what I've done over here. It's basically, I'm basically a Christianimist. I'm a pagan Christian. I'm a full blown, it's just I'm out there now. And so some of the things that I'm making belong in up and out in the arts and culture sector in a different way. So this folk opera, like the festival that I played last weekend, is like a kind of a new age festival. There's like 130 women there that probably all have backgrounds, religious backgrounds to some degree, but have basically been like, but the folk opera, it doesn't ask anybody to like convert or nothing like that. But what it does is it regulates the nervous system that is the elephant in the room, that nobody's touching. And so like I find right now we're just grasping for any symbol all around the world but these symbols. And I've been in rooms where there's so many of them, they actually take the shape almost of the elephant in the room, because you can really feel what's being avoided. And so I'm like just super honest. Like the third song in is called Abun Paternoster, and I start chanting the Lord's Prayer in Aramaic, and then unbeknownst to me, when I wrote that chant, the Paternoster, the traditional one, literally fits in like a puzzle piece over top of this chant. And then a bell starts to ring, to like imply the timekeeping that came into play as this mental rational age, developed into the monastic traditions, and how beautiful it is to begin with, right? How you can start to really feel inside this that there's a rigidity coming, and it morphs into the sound of soldiers' feet marching to the same rhythm. And a friend of mine listened to it, and she's a therapist, and she said, the rhythm of this actually feels like I could do EMDR work, like the trauma therapy,
Right.
to this rhythm. And I said, interesting you say that, because when I perform this, I'm moving to get this shit flowing here, because this is really stuck in basically the entire European like lineage all around the world and on Turtle Island. And so I'm not trying to get people to go to church or convert to anything, but I do feel that there's something that has not been metabolized, and it could become very mutated if we're not touching it and doing things to work with it. So that's really what this album is. And so I'm releasing it under Mediatrix, and then I'm still doing all this other work. And if people want to engage with both, that's fine. But I really wanted, first of all, the algorithms are so powerful. I wanted this to have a chance not to just get buried in like a misinterpretation, like suddenly it's like buried under some kind of praise and worship music on Spotify, when it really belongs in this like almost shamanic category. So
Good.
yeah.
Oh, I appreciate. Good.
I love that. I don't know, how are you guys doing for time if I start talking about a bunch more stuff? Are you okay, or do we need to start wrapping things up?
I'm okay.
Want to do like maybe 15 more minutes or something?
Sure. Yeah. Speaking
Around
of time
there.
and the BBM.
Thanks for asking that, Carmen.
And I just want to say, off the record, I guess, I loved hearing about that. I absolutely, yeah. Thank you, Alana, for sharing that. Yeah, Justin.
Yeah, no, I think that's so great. And I love the way you're talking about the paternoster, because I think those prayers and all of it, even though there certainly have been unhealthy expressions of it, and people are rightly suffering and rightly walking away, it's I think embedded in our cultural consciousness. I have Ari Eugena, I don't have time to go into all of that stuff, but Ari Eugena talks about the relationship between an Anamkara and someone that they mentor. And he says that as we spend this time together, I am created within you and you are created within me. And there's actually a whole Aristotelian metaphysics about how this actually works, and it makes a lot of sense. It's about patterns and about the nature of consciousness. And we definitely don't have time to go into all that. But this notion that we're created within each other, I think is so really important. And I think we're not only just on an individual level created within each other, but we as individuals create our culture and our traditions If I maybe I prefer the language of tradition, I think, even though that's a loaded word for some people. But then our tradition is also created within us. And there's this, again, this reciprocal relationship between us and the tradition, and we create it, but it also creates us in a way that is beyond what we can do and what we can control. You know, there's more there than either the tradition or the individual could have on their own. And so I think that reclaiming things like the paternoster and calling it the paternoster in that really sort of like traditional old school way is really beautiful. And we've been in our community working on that as well. And some of us got together this summer in real life for a retreat. And one of the things we did is we took one of these medieval Celtic practices that some of the Cayley Day monks had, where they would face each of the 4 directions, and then they would face the earth, and then they would face the sky, and they would recite the paternoster in each of the 6 directions and make the sign of the cross. And so it has this very sort of, it's not pagan because the Bible's full of, you know, following the pattern of the sun, but they're following the pattern of the sun. You know, it starts in the east specifically, and they start in the east and then go to the south and the west and the north, which is the pattern of the sun. And then it goes down to the ground where the sun sets underneath and up to the sky where the sun rises once again. And so they're embodying their connection to the cycles of nature and to the cycles of time. But they're also reciting the Lord's Prayer and making the sign of the cross and have these sort of traditional things that people today would sort of be uncomfortable with, or a lot of people would be anyway. I don't know of anyone who would be comfortable with both those aspects, let's say. And it was a really moving experience. We did a meditative walk out to a holy well. There's a natural spring in the place where we met, and we did this and came back. And it was really, really beautiful and touching, and everyone really resonated with it. So we're going to do more of it when we gather again next year. But anyway, when you were talking, that just sort of made me think of that.
Beautiful, beautiful. One thing that just came to mind as you were saying that is one of my beautiful teachers, Cynthia Bourgeot, who you'll both probably know. She always says it's the heart that prays the prayer as well. So that's something to remember as we're working with language, like the Abun, Abba, womb, like father, mother, has that feminine component to it that the paternoster doesn't have. But it's also important to remember that if I'm praying it in a way that's like superior or whatever it is, like where I've got like it's not a super integrated way of doing it, then it is kind of a moot point. So just to remember that, and that many hearts throughout the last 1700 years or so, throughout my ancestry, sincerely prayed the paternoster with all their hearts in a very devotional, extraordinary way. And that's where, again, it's like, rather than just being cut and dried all the time about these things, if we can make them come alive and really recognize the organic nature of that these were humans, you know, praying the rosary, that were that are part of my own flesh and blood, that are part of who I am. Like I might even carry the exact like cell, I don't even know, like it's just of theirs that's still turning in me. And so what do I do with that? Say that cell doesn't belong here, like, right? So that's definitely the work. So
I love from what both of y'all are saying is that we're all translators. I mean, really is the essence of it. It's like a reinterpretation that's accurate to the original and organic, as you're saying. But at the same time, because what I love about people like Patricia Slay and some of the feminist theologians, where she has this whole book on, you know, our Father. And she starts a lot of the prayers. There are poems that she's written, Abba, Amma, sometimes Amma, Abba. And that's the start. Instead of our Father, it's our Abba, Amma. And I love the fact, first of all, Justin, that you have it embodied in the church. I think that's the embodiment is so important. I keep thinking of, you know, how C.S. Lewis has those Perelandra, those pretty bad novels, but they have some pretty cool things in them because he has a head in a jar, and that's kind of, I think, where we are these days. We're the head in the jar, you know. So I love the fact that y'all are talking about approaching it from a very, I really want to say this prayer intentionally and be in the moment with it. And I love that. I absolutely do. Because I'm like you, I think the feminine, in introducing the feminine to it is very important. Otherwise, we've exiled that too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, big time. It's very powerful. I mean, when I said Abun Dabashamaya Nakada Shama, like with 130 women who have a pain body around the Lord's Prayer. There's one woman who ended up having to sit down.
Yeah.
Because she realized it said Father, Mother, Birther of the Cosmos. You know, this like that all along that was the spirit, right? That was there all along, and it really moved her. It doesn't mean she's going to suddenly start praying the Lord's Prayer, but what it does mean is that is a piece of her life that is can rest. It's a piece of her life that can come alive, that isn't just going to be this dormant, potentially mutating thing anymore. It's like metabolized, right? So.
Oh, can I just say one thing? Because I know we don't have that much time left, but I just have to say, I gave myself permission after especially learning that the word Lord literally is the Old English halaford, H-L-A-F, which is loaf, and waird, which is warden or guardian or have dominion over. And if you think about the manorial system and feudalism and Lord, and you think of Wilda Gaffney, Dr. Gaffney, who's done these wonderful lectionaries where she also doesn't use Lord because of the association with slavery. I gave myself permission, and this isn't prescriptive. This is me giving Carmen permission not to use the word Lord because it's not healthy for me. And because when you translate, you see Lord everywhere, and it connects in with the 313 Edict of Milan and that sort of empire mindset. And it has been replacing that with love. And I feel like that woman in your audience, I had to kind of sit down and go, I can have love instead. Yes, you can, Carmen. That has been so healing. So thank you for saying that, because it really is like bringing in unburdening in the Dick Schwartz IFS way. Because I like the fact that you were talking about the rhythms, or like what is it again? Because I'm dyslexic. I can
EMDR. It's like a therapy form that helps with trauma.
Yeah, no, I've studied it because I know you look at it either a light or you have a rhythm, and it helps people process trauma. I just think these are the things, because the desert tradition were the first psychologists. They were not perfect, like nobody's perfect, but they were the first like psychologists. And this is what the space we're talking about is, trying to be open for these. Because I just love that, knowing that you were moving with that and trying to get this stuff unstuck. And like Thomas Keating talks about the junk coming up, and then how do we let go of that and integrate? This is my jam. I just want to say I found like I have my younger brother and sister having this conversation. I'm just like, this is so juicy. This is so, yes, this is good for my heart. Thank y'all both.
Yeah, I agree so much. I wish we had more time to keep talking. Maybe we'll just have to do it again at some point.
I would love it.
I might quickly comment on the Lord thing. I like calling Jesus Lord. I think it's probably because I don't come from a church where that was a thing, and so I 100% get why people wouldn't. But in the scriptures, for me, when Jesus is called Lord, I think it's really a countercultural revolutionary thing to do, because the Caesar was Lord, right? And if you claimed to be Lord, you got crucified, because only Caesar was Lord. And there was, in the Roman classical world, there was the sense that Caesar, or any great leader, Alexander the Great, whoever they might have been, becomes a god. Like they are a god. And so to call Jesus Lord and to call him God is a complete inversion of everything that the empire stands for, because Jesus is a peasant. He's a bastard, to use the word honestly, right? Like he's a, no one knows who his father is from the Roman perspective, and that's an important piece. And he's a peasant, and he's poor, and he's amongst the sinners and the lepers and all of that. And to call him Lord and to have him ride on a donkey, I think is a slap in the face to empire. And so for me to say Jesus is Lord means that Caesar is not. But anyway, that's how I reclaim that language for myself. But
Thank you, Justin, for sharing
Yeah,
that.
thanks. Thank you.
I think it's probably time for us to wrap up. I've had such a wonderful conversation. I very much appreciate you both. Thank you so much. And
Thank you.
is there
Thank
anything
you.
anyone has, or
I've had such fun.
Me too.
Just also just being in the same Zoom room together has been fun. Thank you, Justin. Thank you, Alana. I just want to say y'all are just awesome. I just want to be the person to say it. It has blessed my heart.
well,
Yeah.
thank you for connecting us. I very much appreciate that. All right, take care, guys.
See ya.
Okay, bye-bye.